Right after my C-section, I texted, "Please, I can't lift him. Just need a little help." Mom responded, "We're too busy. Try your neighbor." I stared at the message until my eyes burned. 3 weeks later, still barely walking, I woke to 53 missed calls and a message from my sister. "We're in trouble. Send $1,500 now." I just replied with, "I wasn't expecting much, but I thought they'd at least show up once." 3 days after my C-section, I couldn't even sit up without wincing. The pain was like a pressure cooker going off inside me. My son had been crying for almost an hour, lying in his bassinet a few feet away, and I just couldn't get to him. I'd been trying to reach him with a blanket, trying to pull the bassinet closer, but I ended up crying right along with him. I hadn't slept in 2 nights. So I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and sent the text I thought would make things right. "Please, I can't lift him. Just need a little help." I stared at the screen, waiting. I thought maybe my mom would finally show some maternal instinct. Maybe my sister would surprise me. I was wrong. 3 minutes later, "We're too busy. Try your neighbor." I read it twice, 3 times. I remember thinking it felt like a joke, like some messed up prank they'd laugh about later. But it wasn't. That was it. No follow-up, no call, just that message like I was some annoying stranger asking for a favor. I didn't reply. Instead, I messaged Ryan, the neighbor I barely knew. He and his wife were separated, and I'd mostly seen him in passing. We'd never had a real conversation, but something about him always seemed steady. I didn't know what else to do. I was desperate. He came over 10 minutes later, didn't even knock hard, just let himself in gently. He didn't say much. He just walked over, lifted my son, and helped me sit up. He warmed a bottle, held the baby so I could rest, then cleaned up the kitchen without being asked. I think I mumbled, "Thank you," a dozen times. And when he finally left, I sat there in silence, holding my son and staring at the front door like something massive had just happened. No one from my family followed up. No call to ask how I was recovering. No offer to bring groceries. I had a cousin in Florida who sent me an Uber Eats gift card. That was it. A cousin who lives across the country showed more care than the people 10 miles away. Then, 3 weeks later, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. 53 missed calls. Most from my sister, a few from my mom, one from my dad, which was rare, and one unknown number I didn't recognize. Then came the text. "We're in trouble. Send 1,500 now." Just like that. No hype, no explanation, no punctuation, no mention of the fact that I was still healing, that my son was barely a month old, that I'd been completely abandoned. I just stared at it. I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not sadness, just this quiet clarity. So I replied with the same words my mother sent me. "Try your neighbor." Then I turned my phone off. Not just that day. For the next 3 days, I left it off, and I started making a list in my head of who I could count on and who I couldn't. The people I loved the most were nowhere near that list. When I turned my phone back on, I expected chaos. I got silence. Not a single missed call, no voicemails, nothing. Like my reply had stunned them into retreat. Or maybe they just assumed I was bluffing, that I'd cave and send the money eventually. They always assumed I'd cave. Growing up, I was the one who kept things glued. When my sister stormed out of a family dinner, I followed her. When Mom went silent for days over some petty argument with my dad, I was the buffer. When anyone needed a favor, a ride, money for something last minute, they called me, and I showed up every time. I didn't realize how uneven the scale was until I became a mother, and nobody showed up for me. Ryan started stopping by more, not in a pushy way, just little things. He brought over homemade soup one night and said it was from his grandma's recipe. He'd knock, peek his head in, and say he was just checking if I needed anything heavy lifted. He never stayed long unless I asked him to. His presence was quiet, easy, safe. His wife had moved out 6 months earlier. He told me one evening while he helped assemble a bookshelf. They were still technically married, but it was done. I asked if they had kids. He shook his head, said that was the one thing she never wanted. He paused, then looked over at me holding my son and said softly, "He's lucky to have you." I remember that exact sentence. It stuck. A few days later, my sister called again. I let it ring. She called twice more, then sent a text. "I know you saw the message. This isn't a joke. We really need the money. It's serious." Still no details, no apology, just pressure. Like she hadn't vanished when I was bleeding and shaking and too sore to even walk to the bathroom. I didn't reply. Then my mom called. I picked up. I think part of me still wanted some kind of closure, maybe even a sliver of guilt from her. She started in like nothing had happened, asked if I was doing okay, if the baby was sleeping better, and then, without missing a beat, said she and my dad had invested in something that backfired unexpectedly. They needed $1,500. She said it like she was talking about picking up dry cleaning. I asked her if she remembered the text I sent after my surgery. There was a pause, then a casual, "Well, we thought you'd manage. You're always so strong." That sentence hit harder than I expected, not because it was flattering, because it was lazy. "You're always so strong," is what people say when they don't want to help. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just said I couldn't help them. She didn't try to argue, she just said fine, then hung up. After that call with my mom, things started to shift in small, irreversible ways. I didn't send out the usual group text with baby pictures that week. I didn't update anyone on my recovery or ask how things were going. And no one asked. Not one message. The silence was so loud, it made me wonder if they'd ever actually cared, or if I had just been convenient. A fixer, an extra hand, a spare wallet. Ryan came by on Tuesday to drop off a bag of groceries he said he accidentally overbought. I knew that was a lie, but it was the kind I could accept. I thanked him and offered him coffee. He hesitated at first, then nodded and sat at the kitchen table while I held my son in one arm and made coffee with the other. He told me about how his wife left without a fight. She just packed up one afternoon and said she couldn't do quiet suburbia anymore. He said it like he was still processing it months later. We didn't talk about anything heavy after that. Just coffee, my son. It was the most comfortable I'd felt with another adult in weeks. Meanwhile, my family kept pushing in strange, half-hearted ways. My sister posted a cryptic story on Instagram. Some people forget where they came from. No name, no tags, but I knew who it was for. A few hours later, she texted again. "It's actually about Dad, not you. Don't be dramatic." I didn't reply. The next day, my cousin Danny called. We weren't super close, but she always had a way of being real. No sugarcoating. She'd heard from her mom that things were tense in the family. She asked if I was okay. I told her the truth, the whole thing. From the day of my C-section to the last phone call with my mom. She listened quietly, then said, "Erica, you've been the only one holding that family together for years. Maybe it's time you let it fall apart." That sentence stuck with me for days. I stopped answering my sister completely. I didn't tell them when I started physical therapy. I didn't tell them when my son smiled for the first time. I didn't even tell them when I found a small freelance gig that helped with the bills. Nothing. And they didn't notice, but what they did notice was the money. Another text came in. "Hey, we're a little behind this month. Any chance you can cover the insurance thing like last year?" That was from my dad. He never reached out unless it was about a bill. Not even when I was pregnant. Not even when he found out I was alone during delivery. I replied simply, "I can't. No excuses, no explanations." 5 minutes later, my mom texted, "Is everything okay with you financially?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "How's the baby?" Just concerned that their money tree might be drying up. I didn't reply. The next week, Ryan invited me and the baby to a small barbecue he was having with a few coworkers. I almost said no. Then I looked at my phone, saw the unread messages, and said yes. It was a simple afternoon, nothing special, but at one point, Ryan was holding my son and talking to one of his friends, and I caught myself smiling. Like genuinely smiling. Not the kind you force for pictures, the kind that happens before you even know it's there. And I realized something. My family hadn't just forgotten about me. They'd never really seen me at all. The barbecue turned out to be more of a turning point than I expected. One of Ryan's friends was a pediatric nurse, and when I mentioned my son's irregular sleeping patterns, she offered to take a quick look. It turned out he had a mild tongue tie, something none of the hospital nurses had noticed. She even helped me book a specialist appointment through her clinic. That night, as I tucked him in, I couldn't stop thinking. A stranger had done more for me in 5 minutes than my own family in months. 2 days later, I got an email I wasn't expecting. It was from an attorney. A vague, formal message letting me know my name had come up in a probate discussion. I blinked at the screen, reread it twice, and finally called the number. Apparently, my grandfather, my dad's estranged father, had passed away a year ago. Nobody told me. But in his will, he left behind a small property in upstate New York, a rundown cabin, nothing fancy. But the kicker, he left it to me. Not my dad, not my sister, just me. I hadn't even seen the man since I was a teenager. He and my dad had fought decades ago, and my family made him sound like some villain. But the lawyer said my name was handwritten into the will. He even left a note. To the only one who ever asked how I was doing. That floored me. I remembered sending him a Christmas card when I was 16. I'd almost forgotten about it. Apparently he hadn't. So I called my dad. I didn't ask how he was. I just said, "Why didn't you tell me Grandpa died?" There was silence. Then he exhaled hard and said, "We didn't think it mattered." Didn't matter. A man I had reached out to once, in a tiny act of kindness, thought I mattered enough to leave me his only remaining asset. And my father didn't even tell me he had died. I hung up. That was the day something inside me cracked completely. I called the attorney back and started the process to claim the cabin. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't telling my family a thing about it. Meanwhile, the texts picked up again. Not about Grandpa. They had no idea. My sister said her car needed repairs and hinted at needing a little help. My mom sent a picture of a hospital wristband with no caption. An hour later, she followed it with, "It's not serious, just insurance stuff, but we could use a buffer if possible." They were fishing, prodding. That same day, Ryan helped me install new blackout curtains in the nursery. My son had been sleeping better since the tongue tie fix, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had room to breathe. Later that night, as we were talking on the porch, I told him about the cabin, about the will, about everything. I thought he'd be surprised. He wasn't. He said, "That's what happens when you treat people right. Eventually it comes back." Then he told me something I wasn't expecting. His wife had filed for divorce that week. No drama, just paperwork. Final step in what had already been over for a long time. He smiled at me, and for the first time, I didn't look away. The next morning, I made the drive up to the cabin. Just me and my son. It was about 4 hours out. I hadn't been there since I was maybe 12. When I pulled up, the roof looked worse than in the pictures. The porch was sunken, the windows fogged with years of grime, but the bones were solid. It didn't feel haunted. It felt forgotten, and I could work with forgotten. I sent photos to Ryan. He said he'd come up next weekend to help. He already had tools in the truck. Just like that, we had a plan. The next blow came later that week. My dad showed up at my door unannounced, just rang the bell and waited. I didn't answer at first. I stood behind the curtain holding my baby, heart pounding. He rang twice more, then just stood there. Finally, I opened the door halfway. He didn't say hi, didn't ask to hold his grandson. He just said, "We need to talk about the property." I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and said, "There's nothing to talk about." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. "You're really doing this?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't try again. He just walked off, got in his car, and left. No drama, no yelling, just silence. It was the most honest interaction we'd had in years. By the time Ryan and I made it up to the cabin together, something between us had shifted. It wasn't just about help anymore. There were long looks, quiet smiles, moments when neither of us said anything, and somehow it still felt like a conversation. He was still technically married, but the papers were filed. He showed me the email. He wasn't rushing. Neither was I. But we both knew we just weren't alone anymore, and for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The cabin wasn't anything fancy, but after 2 weekends of work, it started feeling like something real. Ryan patched the roof while I painted the inside walls a soft, warm white. My son started sleeping better there than he ever had at home. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew it felt right. The first kiss came after we put in the new screen door. We didn't plan it. It just happened standing in the kitchen with his hands still dusty and a cup of coffee between us. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet moment we both stepped into without saying a word. He was still technically married then, but the papers were in. He showed me the confirmation the following week. No celebration, no drama, just an end to something that had already been over. Around the same time, the messages from my family turned frantic. My sister tried again, long texts about missing me and starting over and how family needed to stick together. Then came the twist. Mom said, "You have savings now. Can you help with just one thing? We're drowning." I didn't answer. Then the bank called. Someone had tried to access one of the old joint accounts I had forgotten I was even on, one I opened years ago to help them temporarily. I shut it down. That was the final straw. Not a fight, just a quiet door closing. After that, I stopped responding completely. No explanations, no arguments, just silence. I didn't stop helping people. I just started helping the ones who showed up. Like Danny, who drove up one weekend with snacks, wine, and baby clothes. She didn't want anything, just time with us. Ryan started staying over more. We took turns feeding the baby, fixing the porch, picking paint samples. One night, we were sitting outside drinking tea, and he said, "You know, we made this." He meant the cabin, but I think he meant more than that. I didn't need fireworks. I just needed this quiet, honest care. And by the time winter rolled in, my phone had stopped buzzing. They moved on, or at least they stopped pretending. I stayed right where I was, building something better from what they left behind.